Rome is famous for its order, but the fine print of its law books was a total fever dream. Imagine losing your life because your neighbor thought your healthy wheat was witchcraft, or being taxed for using a public toilet. We're exposing 48 of the most nonsensical, petty, and terrifying regulations that actually ran the empire. From mandatory blonde wigs to legal diss tracks, this is the bizarre reality of Roman justice that your history teacher skipped. 1. For centuries, being clean-shaven was the ultimate mark of a civilized Roman citizen. A beard was seen as a sign of laziness or a weird Greek obsession. Then came Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century. He was such a massive fan of Greek culture that he started rocking a full, thick beard, and almost overnight, the empire's grooming laws flipped. Facial hair went from a social taboo to the ultimate imperial power move. It's a perfect example of how one influential guy with a razor, or a lack of one, could rewrite the fashion codes of the world's greatest superpower. 2. Emperor Vespasian was the undisputed king of the side hustle. He famously imposed a tax on the collection of urine from public toilets because ammonia was essential for cleaning togas and tanning leather. When his son complained that taxing liquid waste was beneath an emperor's dignity, Vespasian held a gold coin under his nose and uttered the legendary line, "Pecunia non olet." Money does not stink. It's the ultimate reminder that in the eyes of the government, profit is profit, no matter where it comes from, and the tax man will always find a way to get his cut. 3. Roman slave traders operated under strict consumer protection laws that treated people like used chariots. Every person being sold had to wear a placard listing their defects, such as a tendency to run away, chronic illnesses, or criminal records. If a buyer found a hidden flaw after the purchase, they could sue for a full refund. It's a chillingly mundane law that shows how the empire's legal machine could dehumanize people by applying no-lemon guarantees to human lives, ensuring every transaction was a safe bet for the buyer. 4. In 215 BC, Rome passed the Lex Appia, essentially a war on bling for women. It restricted female extravagance, banning them from owning more than half an ounce of gold or wearing multicolored purple dresses. When the war ended, the men tried to keep the law, but the women of Rome weren't having it. They flooded the streets, blockaded the forum, and successfully forced a repeal. It stands as one of history's first major feminist protests, proving that even in a patriarchy, you don't mess with a Roman woman's wardrobe. 5. Rome was surprisingly modern regarding antitrust laws. Merchants caught fixing prices or hoarding grain faced brutal fines. The government knew a hangry population was a rebellious one, so they functioned as an ancient version of the Federal Trade Commission. Keeping bread affordable wasn't just economics, it was survival. 6. The Vigils, Rome's first fire brigade, had a firefighting strategy that felt more like a demolition crew. In a city of wooden fire traps, they often decided the best way to stop a blaze was to flatten every building in its path to create a fire break. While the state was technically supposed to pay you back for your destroyed home, the process was a bureaucratic nightmare. It was a government service where the heroes would legally tear down your house to save the guy living 3 blocks away. 7. In Rome, a diss track could literally kill you. According to the 12 tables, writing a defamatory song was a capital offense. If you composed a catchy tune mocking a neighbor, the state could legally execute you. It gives killer lyrics a terrifyingly literal meaning. 8. The Romans had a law called actio de poperi, making you strictly liable for any damage caused by your animals. This wasn't just for a minor dog bite. If your pet bear or lion escaped and trashed a neighbor's garden, the bill was entirely yours. It didn't matter if you were careful. The fact that your animal did the damage meant you had to pay. It was the original your pet, your problem rule, but with much more terrifying pets than the average golden retriever or house cat. 9. Emperor Claudius was notoriously obsessed with the health of his guests. After hearing about a man who nearly died because he was too polite to pass gas at a banquet, Claudius reportedly considered an official edict to legally permit flatulence at all dinner parties. He wanted to turn a basic bodily function into a matter of state policy to save his citizens from internal pressure. While the divine right to toot never officially made the law books, it remains the empire's most fragrant attempt at a public health initiative. 10. Freedom in Rome came with a major legal asterisk. When a slave was freed, they became a libertus, but they still owed a duty of obsequium to their former master. This wasn't just a suggestion. It was a legally enforced obligation to show deference, perform services, and never sue their patron without permission. It created a permanent social shadow, a ghost of their former chains that followed them for life. Even with their freedom papers in hand, the law ensured they remained socially and legally subordinate to their former owners. 11. Roman property law had a fascinatingly aggressive stance on trash. If you deliberately abandoned an object, you instantly severed all legal ties to it. This concept, known as res derelicte, meant that the very second you put an old vase on the curb, the next person to touch it became the absolute legal owner. There were no lost and found periods or grace windows. It was the ancient world's ultimate version of finders keepers, turning every Roman street corner into a high-stakes scavenger hunt where ownership was decided by who had the fastest reflexes. 12. Ending a marriage in ancient Rome was easier than getting a table at a crowded tavern. For men, there were no messy court battles or expensive lawyers. You simply had to look at your wife and say, "Tuas res tibi habito," which translates to "take your things and go." Repeat that 3 times, hand back her dowry, and you were legally single. It was the original no-fault divorce. A lifelong union could be dissolved with a single sentence and a suitcase by the door, making the sanctity of marriage surprisingly fragile. 13. If a person or an animal was struck by lightning, Roman law strictly forbade their burial. The spot where they fell was considered bidental, a place claimed by Jupiter himself. Moving the body was a religious crime. If your cousin got zapped during a storm, you couldn't give him a proper funeral. You just had to rope off the area and leave him exactly where he landed. It essentially turned the local park into a permanent holy "don't touch this" zone, because the king of the gods had personally called dibs on the corpse. 14. For centuries, it was actually illegal to pay a lawyer in Rome. The Lex Cincia viewed legal defense as a noble duty performed for honor, not profit. Of course, Roman lawyers were still, well, lawyers. They quickly invented a system of institutionalized hypocrisy where they'd accept gifts after a trial or loans that were never meant to be repaid. It was a legal system that pretended to be above the grubby world of money while running entirely on the ancient equivalent of under-the-table envelopes and voluntary donations. 15. Under Emperor Augustus, being a bachelor wasn't just a lifestyle choice, it was a fiscal liability. The Lex Julia penalized men between 25 and 60 who remained single, viewing their lack of a spouse as a threat to the empire's future population. These confirmed bachelors faced higher taxes and were legally barred from receiving inheritances from anyone outside their immediate family tree. Augustus essentially put a price tag on the single life. If you wanted to protect your fortune and avoid the government's meddling, you had to get married, making the search for a wife a matter of national tax compliance. 16. Roman theft laws rewarded a fast getaway in the weirdest way possible. If you were caught in the act, furta manifestum, the victim could legally flog you or even take you as a slave. But if you managed to stash the goods and were caught 5 minutes later, it was downgraded to furtum nec manifestum. The penalty? Just a fine of double the item's value. It was a bizarre system that made the severity of the crime depend entirely on the thief's sprint speed and ability to find a good hiding spot before the guards arrived. 17. Emperor Augustus tried to legislate morality with the Julian laws, making adultery a public crime that required a husband to prosecute his wife or face charges of pimping. The punishment was brutal: exile to a rocky island and the forfeiture of half her property. This morality crusade backfired spectacularly when Augustus's own daughter, Julia, was caught in multiple high-profile affairs. Bound by his own rigid law, the heartbroken emperor had to publicly condemn and banish his only child. It's a classic lesson in why you shouldn't write laws you aren't prepared to enforce on your own family tree. 18. If a woodpecker started pecking on your house, you were in big trouble. This wasn't just a nuisance. The bird was sacred to Mars, and its presence was a divine warning of impending doom. You couldn't just shoo it away. Legal and religious customs forced you to perform expensive, complex purification rituals to appease the gods. You essentially had to hire a high-priced priest to exorcise your porch because a bird decided your siding looked like a snack. 19. Rome's earliest legal code, the 12 Tables, featured a very specific rule regarding the disposal of precious metals during traditional ceremonies. To prevent the waste of valuable resources and curb public displays of extravagance, it was generally illegal to include gold jewelry or bullion in these rites. However, the law carved out one famous exception: gold used for dental work. If a citizen had gold wire binding their teeth together, that metal was legally permitted to stay right where it was. It was a rare, practical loophole in Rome's strict anti-luxury regulations, proving that even the most rigid legal systems have to draw the line somewhere, usually at your dental bridge. 20. Roman zoning laws required a 2.5-foot gap between houses to stop fires from spreading. If your roof beam stuck out into this space, you could be sued. But here's the kicker. The law didn't force you to cut it off. Instead, you just had to pay a recurring fine for as long as it stayed there. It was effectively a government-run subscription service for bad architecture. If you were rich enough, you could ignore the safety codes and encroach on public space as long as you kept the monthly payments coming. 21. Disturbing a tomb, a crime called sepulchre violagio, was treated as a direct assault on the spirits of the dead. This wasn't just simple theft. It was a massive religious offense. Many tombs were carved with explicit legal curses and specific fines that violators would owe the state treasury if caught. You weren't just risking a jail cell for grave robbing. You were inviting a lawsuit from a very angry ghost. Roman law made sure your legal troubles could follow you into eternity. 22. Imagine the most powerful military on Earth waiting for a bird to fly left before they could attack. Every major state action in Rome required the green light from the augurs, priests who read the flight patterns of birds. Their verdict was legally absolute. If a priest claimed a woodpecker looked at him the wrong way, the entire political system ground to a halt and any decisions made were voided. It turned the fate of the Mediterranean into a game of high-stakes bird, watching where a pigeon's flight path had more legal weight than a senator's vote. 23. In 450 BC, Rome had to pass a law telling people to stop being so dramatic at funerals. Wealthy families were hiring professional mourners who would wail and scratch their faces to make the burial look more prestigious. It turned mourning into a theatrical arms race of fake grief. The government finally stepped in, banning excessive wailing and professional criers. They essentially legislated dignity, forcing the elite to stop paying people to scream in the streets just to flex their social status on their dead relatives. It's the ancient version of, calm down, it's a funeral, not a Broadway show. 24. A Roman court summons was essentially a legalized kidnapping. Under the rule of in ius vocatio, if you called someone to court and they refused to budge, you were legally allowed to use force to drag them there. As long as you had witnesses, you could physically manhandle the defendant all the way to the magistrate. There was no, "I'll see you in court," email, or polite letter. It was more like, "You're coming with me now," or "I'm dragging you by your ankles through the dirt." It was a legal system with zero patience for no-shows. 25. In Rome, your name was your legal ID card and social GPS. Only full citizens were entitled to the trianomina, or 3 names, like Gaius Julius Caesar. If you only had one name, you were legally marked as a slave. 2 names suggested you were a foreigner or a freedman. This wasn't just a naming convention. It was a law that forced you to broadcast your entire social rank every time you introduced yourself. It's hard to imagine a world where having a middle name is the only thing keeping you from being considered property. 26. Being a doctor in ancient Rome was a high-risk career choice. If a physician's incompetence or negligence led to a patient's death, they weren't just looking at a bad review, they were looking at criminal charges. Depending on the victim's social status, the penalty for medical malpractice could range from exile to execution. It was a powerful legal incentive for surgeons to actually read a medical scroll before picking up the scalpel, as one wrong cut could literally end both the patient's life and the doctor's career in a very permanent way. 27. Gambling was a serious crime in Rome for 51 weeks of the year, viewed as a moral rot that ruined families. But for 1 week in December, during the festival of Saturnalia, the law didn't just break, it flipped. Dice games were played openly by everyone from senators to slaves. It was a government-mandated national free-for-all, a legal purge, but for betting. Rome effectively legalized Las Vegas for 7 days a year just to let the population blow off some steam before the iron fist of morality and legal fines returned in January. 28. The color purple was the ancient world's ultimate restricted item. The dye was made from thousands of sea snails and was so astronomically expensive that it was legally reserved almost exclusively for the emperor. Wearing a full purple toga wasn't just a fashion faux pas, it was an act of treason. By donning the imperial color, you were legally declaring yourself his equal, which was a great way to get yourself killed. It was the most extreme dress code in history, where a simple color choice was treated as a direct challenge to the throne. 29. Under paranoid emperors like Tiberius, treason laws became absurdly dangerous for the average person. It was a capital offense to carry a coin bearing the emperor's face into a latrine or to get undressed near an imperial statue. Because the emperor's image was legally sacred, taking his face into the bathroom was seen as a direct insult to the state. People were literally executed for having some loose change in their pocket while nature called. It turned every trip to the bathroom into a potential dance with the death penalty. 30. Rome had a major noise pollution problem, so they banned chariots and heavy wagons from the streets at night. The sound of iron-rimmed wheels clattering on stone was so deafening that it kept the entire city awake. It was the world's first traffic ordinance, aimed at stopping ancient joyriders and delivery drivers from ruining everyone's sleep. Even 2,000 years ago, people were filing noise complaints about teenagers in high-performance 2-horsepower vehicles waking up the neighborhood. Some things, like noisy neighbors and traffic jams, are truly eternal. 31. Roman actors lived in a weird legal twilight zone. They could be the biggest superstars in the empire, adored by thousands and swimming in gold, yet they were legally classified as infames, the same status as pimps and gladiators. This meant they lost their right to vote or hold public office. They were essentially the ancient version of A-list celebrities who were simultaneously treated as legal trash by the state. Rome loved the performance but had a law on the books that ensured the performer stayed at the very bottom of the social ladder. 32. Roman maritime law featured a brutal rule called the lex rhodia. In some regions, if a ship crashed, any cargo that washed up on the beach legally belonged to the person who owned that stretch of land. This effectively turned coastal landowners into government-sanctioned looters. Instead of helping survivors, landowners had a massive financial incentive to hope for more shipwrecks. It was a law that turned every storm into a massive payday for the wealthy, making finders keepers a very profitable and very cruel coastal business. 33. Rome usually obsessed over legal paperwork, but they made a beautiful exception for soldiers. A man about to head into battle could make a valid will by simply writing his wishes in the dirt with his sword or whispering them to the guy in the next rank. This in prosincu will bypass all the usual bureaucratic red tape and witness requirements. It was a rare moment of legal compassion, recognizing that if a man was willing to die for the empire, His last words should count, no matter how they were recorded. 34. The Romans were so deeply superstitious about the left side that they actually gave us the modern word sinister. Stepping into a house with your left foot first was considered such a massive omen of impending doom that wealthy homeowners would station a specialized slave at their door for one reason only: to watch the feet of every arriving guest. This threshold guard ensured you entered with your right foot to keep the household vibes pure. It was a legally recognized custom where a single wrong step could technically be blamed for any bad luck that followed. 35. The 12 Tables, Rome's earliest legal backbone, actually listed magically cursing crops as a capital offense. Imagine your neighbor's wheat failing while your field looks like a postcard. Under the law of qui fruge ex contacit, that was proof of your dark arts. This wasn't just weird gossip, it was a state-prosecuted crime. The Romans genuinely believed you could sing a harvest away. It highlights a society where a bad crop wasn't blamed on poor irrigation, but on the guy next door being a secret sorcerer. 36. The 12 Tables included a surprisingly practical rule for handling tree-related neighborhood feuds. If your neighbor's tree branches overhung your property, the law gave you the explicit right to prune them up to a height of 15 feet. Even better, any fruit that naturally fell from those branches onto your land was legally yours to keep. It wasn't considered theft. It was simply your right as a landowner. This common-sense law settled thousands of potential arguments before they could turn into blood feuds, all by establishing the simple principle of finders keepers. 37. The Voconian Law of 169 BC was a masterclass in government-mandated sexism. It strictly limited the amount of wealth a woman could inherit, specifically targeting the richest families in Rome. The men in charge were terrified that if women controlled massive fortunes, the money would eventually drift away from the patriarchal bloodline. They feared a generation of independent, super-wealthy heiresses would disrupt the social order and the traditional power of the male head of the family. So they simply made it illegal for women to be too rich in the eyes of the law. 38. In ancient Rome, a love potion wasn't just a romantic myth, it was a potential crime scene. The legal system viewed magical charms and love filters under the category of beneficium, the exact same word used for criminal poisoning. The Roman legal mind didn't see much of a difference between a chemical toxin and a magical spell. Both were viewed as clandestine attacks designed to subvert a person's free will or health. If you tried to brew a drink to make someone fall for you, the state could prosecute you for a deadly assault, treating your broken heart as a matter of national security. 39. Roman law had a truly barbaric glitch. The state relied on the twisted legal theory that truth could only be verified under extreme physical pressure. For a slave's testimony to be valid in court, it was often mandatory that it be obtained through questioning that would be considered a crime today. The logic was that a slave's loyalty to their master was so absolute that they would naturally lie under normal circumstances. It was a fundamentally flawed rule, as anyone in enough distress will say whatever the interrogator wants to hear just to make the situation stop. 40. Emperor Caligula famously planned to appoint his favorite horse, Incitatus, to the office of consul, the highest political position in the government. This wasn't just a crazy man's whim. It was a calculated legal slap in the face to the entire Roman Senate. By giving his horse a marble stall, a jeweled collar, and his own team of servants, Caligula was telling the politicians that a literal animal could do their jobs better than they could. He was assassinated before the inauguration. But for a moment, the Roman legal system was staring down the barrel of a horse-run government. 41. If you were captured in war, the Roman law essentially considered you dead. Under a principle called capitis diminutio maxima, your marriage was instantly dissolved and your will was executed. However, if you managed to escape and make it back to Roman territory, you could trigger a legal undo button called post liminium. This instantly resurrected your legal existence, restoring your property, your rights, and your citizenship as if you had never left. It was a unique legal fiction that allowed the state to literally bring its soldiers back from the dead and fix their lives. 42. Roman inheritance law had a very strict no ghosting policy for children. A father was legally required to either name his children as heirs in his will or explicitly disinherit them by name with a clear reason. He couldn't just leave them out and hope for the best. If a father failed to mention a son, the entire will was declared invalid and the son would automatically receive his legal share anyway. It was a safeguard that forced families to be direct about their drama. You couldn't just quietly cut someone out. You had to look them in the legal eye and admit it. 43. To stop the elite from showing off their wealth, Rome passed sumptuary laws that strictly capped how much you could spend on a single dinner party. The Lex Fania even went so far as to limit the number of guests you could invite to your home. These laws were almost impossible to enforce, and the wealthy mostly treated the fines as an extravagance tax, or the cost of doing business. It's the ancient equivalent of the government trying to tell you that your Saturday night guest list is a threat to the nation's morality, and then charging you for every extra friend. 44. Moving a neighbor's boundary stone wasn't just a property dispute in Rome. It was an act of war against the gods. These stones were considered sacred to the god Terminus. According to early law, if you were caught shifting a marker to steal a few extra feet of land, both you and your oxen could be legally devoted to the gods, which was a fancy way of saying you were executed. It turned a simple landscaping argument into a matter of eternal damnation, proving that the Romans took their property lines more seriously than almost anything else in the entire world. 45. To fix Rome's legendary traffic jams, Julius Caesar didn't build more roads. He just made traffic illegal. A sweeping law banned nearly all wheeled vehicles from the city's streets from sunrise until dusk. This turned Rome into a pedestrian's paradise by day, but a literal nightmare by night. Since every delivery had to happen after sunset, the city became a deafening chaos of clattering wheels and screaming drivers while everyone else was trying to sleep. Caesar solved the gridlock problem by ensuring that no one in the capital got a decent night's rest for centuries. 46. In the densely packed apartment blocks of Rome, a common danger was having wastewater or trash thrown directly out of upper-story windows. To handle this, the law created the Actio de Delectis Velefusis. If something fell from a building and caused injury or damage below, the person living in that apartment was strictly liable, even if they didn't throw it themselves. This forced tenants to police their own roommates and guests, turning every window into a potential legal liability and creating a powerful incentive to not treat the street below like a personal dumpster. 47. One of the most terrifying Roman laws was Patria Potestas, which gave a father absolute legal power over his children for their entire lives. A Roman father legally owned everything his adult children earned, and, in the earliest days, even held the right of life and death over them. He could sell his son into slavery or, in extreme cases of perceived dishonor, even order their execution without a trial. It was the ultimate my house, my rules policy, where a grown man with his own family was still legally a minor in the eyes of his living father. 48. For a long period in the early Republic, it was strictly illegal for a patrician to marry a plebeian. This wasn't just about social snobbery. It was state-enforced class warfare designed to keep power and wealth trapped within the aristocratic bloodlines. It created a rigid legal wall that no amount of love or money could initially climb. It took decades of intense public pressure and civil unrest before the law was finally repealed, proving that even in the incredibly rigid world of Roman law, the will of the people eventually found a way to break the system and change the rules. 48 laws, and somehow they still conquered the world. But now it's your turn. Which of these regulations is so objectively brain-dead that it makes your local DMV look like a sanctuary of logic? Was it the urine tax, the death penalty for songs, or the bird omens? Don't play it safe. Tell me which law is the ultimate champion of stupidity in the comments. Smash the like button and subscribe if you survived this legal circus. See you in the next one.